ever get this, like, nagging feeling that something's just not right with the whole corporate world?
Yeah.
Like when a billion-dollar company, swoops in, buys up a bunch of trailer parks, and suddenly people are like, struggling to afford rent
Yeah.
in their own communities?
Yeah.
It's almost medieval, right?
It is, yeah.
Well, today we're diving deep into an article that calls this whole thing corporate feudalism.
Okay.
And it argues that this might not be a new thing at all, but rather like the natural progression of capitalism
Right.
as we know it.
It's a fascinating take.
Right.
And the article really digs into the history of something called the Highland Clearances
Okay.
in Scotland to draw some thought-provoking parallels.
Okay. Highland clearances. So for those of us who might have slept through that history lesson, what are we talking about?
Imagine the Scottish Highlands, this stunning landscape, home to Gaelic communities for centuries.
Right.
Now picture this. Between the 18th and 19th centuries, landowners, often with the government's blessing, decided sheep were more profitable than people.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was brutal. Families were forced off their ancestral lands,
Wow.
their entire way of life uprooted. Some were pushed into poverty, others forced to emigrate. Just imagine the impact, not just economically,
Right.
but culturally too.
Right.
Their language,
Yeah.
their traditions, their whole heritage systematically dismantled.
That's heavy stuff. So
Yeah.
how does this article connect that to what's happening now with corporations?
Well, the article argues that we're seeing a modern form of clearance,
Yeah.
just with a different set of actors. Instead of landowners and sheep, it's corporations,
Yeah.
driven by profit, displacing communities in a different way.
Right.
Think about those trailer park buyouts, for example.
Right. Suddenly, people who own their homes are at the mercy of a corporation that sees them as just another asset on a balance sheet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article goes beyond just the economic aspect. It argues that it's not just about losing physical space, but also about cultural and social identity being eroded. It draws a parallel to the destruction of Gaelic culture during the clearances.
So it's like gentrification, right?
Yeah.
Where a neighborhood gets transformed.
Yeah.
And while it might look better on the surface, it comes at the cost of pushing out the people who gave that community its character.
That's a great example.
Right.
It's that same sense of erasure, a community being fractured for the sake of profit.
So how does this whole corporate feudalism thing come about? The article seems to put a lot of the blame on something called neoliberalism.
Right, and it's important to understand what we mean by neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Basically, it's an economic philosophy that emphasizes deregulation, privatization, shrinking the public sector. You get the idea.
Right.
It's the let the market decide mentality, taken to the extreme.
Okay, so less government, more free market. Sounds good in theory,
Right.
but what actually happened?
Well, the article argues that while neoliberalism was supposed to unleash individual freedom and prosperity,
Yeah.
it ended up paving the way for this corporate dominance we're seeing. And it specifically points to the policies of leaders like Thatcher and Reagan as examples.
Right. Those were the days. Reaganomics, Thatcherism, trickle-down economics, they called it.
Yeah.
Trickle-down freemier for everyone, though. Did it?
Exactly. Take the deregulation of the financial industries, for example. It led to massive profits for some, but also created an environment ripe for risky lending practices and speculation, ultimately contributing to the 2008 financial crisis.
And it's always the average person who ends up footing the bill.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, the wealthy elite saw their wealth skyrocket.
Right.
So while some were celebrating the free market, others were struggling with the fallout. Things like rising healthcare costs, education becoming increasingly unaffordable.
Yeah, the whole yacht and beach house crowd versus everyone else.
Exactly. And the article suggests that this disparity, this feeling of being stuck, while a select few reap the rewards, is at the heart of corporate feudalism.
Yeah.
It's like we've traded one master for another. Instead of the state, it's corporations calling the shots, holding immense power over our lives.
It's like we've gone from serving the crown to serving the corporations. But it's not just about economics, right?
No.
This article digs into the psychological impact of all this, too.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, the article brings in this really interesting framework called the Power Threat Meaning Framework.
Okay. Break that down for me. What's the power threat meaning framework all about?
Well, it basically argues that a lot of the things we often see as individual struggles,
Right.
things like stress, anxiety, feeling powerless, are actually very rational responses to very real threats in our environments.
So it's not just me feeling overwhelmed
Right.
by student loan debt,
Yeah.
a volatile job market, and the rising cost of, well,
Yeah, everything.
yeah.
Yeah. The PTMF helps us see those experiences, not as personal failings, but as understandable reactions to a system that often feels stacked against us.
Right.
Yeah, and the article uses this framework to understand how people are impacted by this whole corporate feudalism thing.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like if you're constantly worried about making rent
Mm-hmm.
or losing your job, that constant stress takes a toll. It's not just in your head. Those are legitimate threats to your well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's even more interesting is how the article connects this to a well-known work that's often cited as a defense of free markets. Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom.
Okay, I've heard of that book.
Yeah.
It's basically a warning against...
government control, right?
Right. Hayek argued that excessive government intervention in the economy could lead to tyranny, stifling individual liberty and progress.
Which makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But how does this article tie that back to corporate feudalism? It seems like a bit of a leap.
Well, here's the irony. The article argues that by embracing neoliberalism, with its emphasis on deregulation and shrinking the public sector,
Right.
we've actually paved the way for a different kind of serfdom.
Corporate serfdom.
Exactly. We were so focused on avoiding government overreach that we didn't see the rise of corporate power creeping in.
Right.
And now these massive corporations, with their vast resources and influence, are the ones dictating the terms of our lives. So it's like we've swung from one extreme to the other. Instead of the state being the all-powerful entity, it's corporations holding all the cards. They control so much: what we eat, what we buy, the information we consume.
Right. And that, the article argues, is the ultimate irony.
Yeah.
Hayek's warning about the road to serfdom was well-intentioned, but it failed to anticipate that corporations could become just as powerful and potentially tyrannical as any government.
It's a chilling thought, honestly, knowing that a handful of powerful entities have so much control over our lives. It feels like we're back in the Middle Ages, just with better technology.
And just like in the Middle Ages, people are finding ways to resist these power structures.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope.
There's always hope. The article highlights how, throughout history,
Hmm.
people have resisted oppressive systems.
Right. And it's not just about storming castles anymore, right?
Right. It's about reclaiming what should be ours. Things like affordable housing, quality education, access to health care. It's about pushing back against this idea that everything is for sale to the highest bidder.
So how do we do that? How do we reclaim those things?
Yeah.
Those essential parts of a functioning society?
Well, the article points to
Mm.
a few historical and modern examples of resistance. You have the Gaelic resistance during those Highland clearances we talked about earlier.
Right.
And more recently, you have movements like the farmers in India protesting those controversial agricultural laws, or the
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street movement, which brought attention to wealth inequality
Mm.
and corporate influence.
Right. Movements like that, they really capture the collective frustration people feel. It's about saying, hey, this isn't right, and we're not going to stand for it. But those were huge, organized movements. What can everyday people actually do? It's easy to feel powerless against these massive corporations.
It's true, these systems are deeply entrenched, and change doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
But the article's message is not to despair, but to recognize that we're not alone in this, and that collective action, in all its forms, is crucial.
So what does that look like? What can someone listening to this right now actually do?
It starts with awareness, recognizing how corporate power operates, how it influences our lives and communities.
Okay.
From there, it's about making conscious choices.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, for one, supporting local businesses over large corporations whenever possible is a small but meaningful act. It's about shifting our economic power back into our communities.
And I guess that goes hand in hand with being a more conscious consumer in general, really thinking about where our money is going and what values those companies uphold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the political side of things,
Okay.
educating ourselves about the policies that either prop up these corporations or hold them accountable,
Right.
and then advocating for change
Yeah.
within our own communities.
So contacting our representatives,
Right.
getting involved in local politics, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Right.
Talking to friends and family about these issues, raising awareness in our own social circles, those conversations matter.
It's about planting seeds, right? Yeah.
getting people thinking about these issues and questioning the status quo,
Right.
because it's so easy to just go along with the system, especially when it feels so big and powerful.
Absolutely. The more we talk about these issues, the more we challenge the narrative that corporate dominance is inevitable, the more likely we are to create a world where people and communities come before profits.
So to wrap this up for our listeners out there, it seems like the takeaway here isn't just about understanding this idea of corporate feudalism, but about recognizing that we have more power than we think.
To change things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We have the power to make different choices, to support businesses that align with our values, to advocate for policies that prioritize people and the planet. It might feel like an uphill battle sometimes, but history has shown time and time again that collective action can lead to profound change.
It all starts with awareness, then action, and never underestimating the power of collective effort. So the next time you see a news story about corporate greed, or feel overwhelmed by the state of the world, remember those farmers in India, those Occupy Wall Street protesters, those Gaelic communities resisting displacement. Remember that throughout history, ordinary people have found ways to fight back and reclaim their power, and so can we. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.